law enforcement. So I've said this before, and I will say it actually in the next session. Law enforcement cannot be property managers. They cannot just be moving people's bodies and limiting people's freedoms from going in spaces and places. They have to actually be people that protect and serve. I mentioned that my activism in Ferguson led me to do a lot of things. One was to actually get tear gas several times, which I don't recommend necessarily, but it was the what. And so 3 days after Michael Brown was killed in St. Louis, I was asked to speak in front of a church, kind of like this church, just with more Black people, and that was funny. And I know, I'm just funny by nature, I hate to tell you. But I told a story that I had not told in 10 years prior to that moment. And I had not told the story because every time I told the story, I cried. And the story hit the wire, which it took me about 4 days to figure out why it was news. So I'm the mother of 4. God has a sense of humor. I had twins first. Yeah, I don't gamble or drink for this reason. Yeah, that's really true. I'm like, no, I'm really lucky. I had 2 kids on the first try. But when our boys were about 10, so we had had this conversation, much like my parents had had having boys, we had a conversation about when we were going to have the conversation with our sons to give them the talk. And we had decided, my husband and I had decided that we would give them the talk when they got to be as tall as I am, and I am 5 feet tall. So they were just 10. It didn't take long to get to be 5 feet tall. And so we sat our boys down, Andrew and Ashton, and we gave them the talk about what to do, what to expect. And we said the things that you have now heard probably over and over again since this moment 2 years ago. And they agreed at 10. They shook their heads in agreement. We told them, this is not the time to stand up for yourself. This is not the time to express your civil rights. This is not time to be indignant. This is not time to question law enforcement. We need you to do whatever they say, no matter what they say. We need you to do whatever they say because we want you to come home. We don't want to identify your body. We don't want to sit on the front pew. We want you to come home. We will handle whatever happens after that as long as you can get to us. And so at the age of 12, my son Ashton was stopped by the police. He had been dropped off in a neighborhood. We live in a college town where there's shops and stores. In the middle of the day, beautiful day, and his friends were drinking. And so he decided to leave his friends and walk home, maybe a mile away from there. And on his way home, he was stopped by the police at the age of 12. And so he came home and he was flustered. He remembered what we said, but he was flustered. And so he starts asking me questions. He said, I don't understand, like I'm wearing Sperry topsiders and khakis and a polo shirt that's tucked in, I have my belt on. Because in his mind, as long as he looked a certain way, what we told him was gonna happen wouldn't happen. Because he was 12 years old. So he's trying to make sense of this. And at 12 years old, I knew and then he knew what he was wearing would not matter. And so we asked a bunch of questions. Is it because of my race? Is it because I'm Black? And I said, you know what, Ashton, I don't know. Maybe. He asked so many questions that day. And it was his last question that got me. So he looked at me and he said, Mommy, I just want to know how long this will last. And I looked at my 12-year-old son and said, for the rest of your life. I went to Ferguson, Missouri, because I don't want that to be true anymore. I actually don't want us to have the conversations with our children and then to have the answer that I had to give my kid that day. I think we could change it, not just in law enforcement, but in education and in healthcare, in every place that we are. But we have to be not only deeply committed, but we have to be deeply connected with one another. And so I ask that you do this work, not for me and my kid, but now that you've heard my story, if I called and told you something happened to one of my children, you would grieve too. And so I need us to act like it's our kid out there on the line. And if you know anything about mommies, we fight like hecky-do for a kid, right? Like 7 or 8 times getting tear gas, getting shot with, right? I'm willing to do that because I would rather die fighting for my children to be free than to live watching them be captive.